Hey there folks, today I'm going to show you how I installed a couple of front struts on my wife's 2017 Nissan Micra, also known as the K13 Micra. I'm also going to touch on how I sourced these struts, because if you're a Micra owner in Canada, you know how difficult it is sometimes to get parts for these cute little cars.
It all started when I put the winter tires on my wife's Micra. Found there was something wrong with the strut, and I'll show you what happened later. I called all the local auto parts dealers, and they didn't carry any struts for Micras. So I went online to the Nissan parts page, and I found the strut, got the part number, and I called the dealer. They confirmed that that was the part number for the 2017 Micra, and they also told me that it would take a couple of weeks to get it in, and they were asking a crazy amount of money for it, something that I didn't really want to pay. And they also confirmed that that strut also fits the Nissan Versa. And he provided me with the model range or the year range of what Versa it fits. And armed with that information, we went to the internet and we found these struts. So these are a full strut coil assembly. I'll drop the link down below. Here's the right one, and here is the left one. First thing I needed to do was put the car in the garage. And before I jacked it up, I wanted to just loosen the nut on the top of the strut. I didn't have a pass-through socket, so I used a 18 millimeter box-end wrench that was just deep enough to go down to the cup to hold on to the nut, and a 6 millimeter Allen wrench to hold the shaft so I could just break the nut. After jacking up the car and making sure that it was sufficiently supported, I popped off the wheel, and this is what I was faced with. I knew I had to remove the two bolts, the two main bolts where the yellow arrows are pointing. There was a nut up at the blue arrow that holds the sway bar onto the strut. The red arrow is actually pointing to a clip that holds the flex hose belonging to the brake onto the strut. And the green arrow is kind of pointing towards the ABS line that is held in by a rubber grommet on the back of the strut. All this had to be removed so I could replace the strut. These bolts came out a little easier than I expected. I used a 21 millimeter wrench and a 21 millimeter socket and a 2-foot breaker bar. When I broke the nut, I got a ratchet, popped on the socket, and then backed the nuts out to pretty much the end of the thread. Removing the nut from the end of the sway bar link was a bit more difficult than I anticipated. I initially tried a 5 millimeter hex and a 15 millimeter wrench as in the picture, but that didn't work. So I put the hex away, grabbed the 17 millimeter, slipped it in behind the bracket, and then that allowed me to turn the nut and get it off. In order to remove the sway bar from the strut, I actually had to jack up the strut a little in order to wiggle out the sway bar. Before I removed these two big bolts, I reached in behind and pulled out the ABS wire. I also pulled the clip holding in the flex hose, the brake line, and then tucked those out of the way. I removed the lower bolt, put a punch through, removed the upper bolt, and put a big screwdriver through there so that when I put a jack underneath, just to jack it up ever so slightly, it would still hold in place. Then I removed the nut on the upper part of the strut in the engine bay, as well as removed the rubber plate. Then it's time to pull the strut. It took a couple of taps with a hammer and some gentle maneuvering, and I removed the strut, being mindful of the brake line and the ABS line, and it left me with this empty wheel well. And this is what I saw when I put on the winter tires. The lower plate belonged to the spring was actually rusted away. A little scary. And here are the struts. The old one on the left and the new one on the right. And they are the same length and all the same dimensions. Just at this angle, the newer one looks a little longer. To install the strut, I maneuvered it in through the wheel well and roughly up into the strut tower. I held it with my right hand and used my left hand. I reached up over the fender into the engine bay to where the top of the strut tower was. I aligned the strut to the hole, put the rubber plate on over top of the strut, then took the nut and then tightened it on the top of the strut just a couple of turns just to hold it. It took some maneuvering, and using my punch and my screwdriver, I got the holes lined up for these big bolts. I popped them in and torqued them down to spec. That upper brake clip came off the Micra. It was rusted and I couldn't use it. So I went to my parts bin and I found the lower one that actually came off of a Hummer H3 brake job that I'd done ages ago. That's why I don't throw away anything. With the ABS line hooked up and the sway bar reattached, it was time to put the wheel back on and lower the car back down to the floor. With the weight of the Micra back on the strut, it was time to do the final tightening of the upper strut nut, and I was done. And a little bit of rinse and repeat on the passenger side, and the job was finished.
And a couple of hours later, I have both struts replaced. This one here was the really bad one. And I've actually reclaimed my garage, cleaned up and put all my tools away. I say it took me about 3 hours to replace both struts, and of that, it took me, I say, 30 minutes to remove both of those nuts on the sway bars. They were a real pain. But it's done now. My wife's Micra has 2 new front struts. I also secured the heat shield and installed a new set of wipers. So she's ready to go. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one.